right on the landing ground.
Thank you for joining us. You are listening to A Radio, and this is The Morning Moment. Please click on the follow button on Spreaker.com. This piece is entitled Socialism Does Not Work. Oh, and that's what TRUDEAU is, by the way. This first clip is from DanHannan, and I believe he's an MEP, or was an MEP, and I will put a link to the full video on my website as usual. But if you had any doubt what the real goals of socialism are, here they are for all to see. Now I have a second clip which is quite short. This second piece is from a George Watson, who is a literary historian from Cambridge University, and I will put a link to the piece that I'm playing on my website as usual. And it clearly highlights what socialism and socialists really are all about. Obviously it will be shocking, but I think it's important that people need to know what liberals are about, because they're socialists. And if they're socialists, they believe this stuff. And in my mind, it's totally incompatible with democracy. You can't be democratic and be a socialist.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, who said this? I'm a socialist, and a very different kind of socialist from your rich friend Count Reventlow. It was 1930, and the speaker was a rising German politician called Adolf Hitler. In 1930, the contention that fascism had emerged out of socialism was accepted across the board. It was an observed historical fact. Fascists marched under red banners on May Day. Their leaders believed in high tariffs, in workers' control of factories, in a moment, in common production of and distribution and exchange, as we just heard. Go on. Yeah. And there was a reason why, and peu de patience, as we say where I work, it is absolutely true that socialists of the national and Leninist varieties were bitterly opposed. They were fishing in the same pool. They were competing for the same kind of voter. The one kind of person that neither brand of socialist had any time for was the classical liberal, what they called the decadent Anglo-Saxon bourgeois capitalist. Why? Because theirs was an ideology that elevated coercion over freedom. Now, why do I begin with this Godwin's Law high-stake opening? Two reasons. First of all, as a corrective to the self-righteousness that we've already started hearing, where people who claim to be socialists then start claiming credit for everything from the extension of the franchise to the extension of universal education. But my real point is this one. Socialism rests on compulsion. Its defining ethic is not equality, but coercion. Socialism and capitalism are matrices. They are economic systems within which people can be generous or greedy. They can be selfish or altruistic. Human nature comes, whether from our genes or from our maker. It isn't something that's created by an economic system. But what's unique about socialism is the readiness of the state to deploy coercive force. Now, we've evolved a great vocabulary to describe this. We talk about things like asking people to pay a bit more tax, right? See what happens if they choose not to. Behind all that polite sounding, asking them to pay their share, to contribute, is the threat of prison. Now, of course, there are some occasions where any society will need to rely on coercive force, on incarceration. There are some taxes that are necessary in any system. We all accept that. But the use of coercive and ultimately lethal force by the state is its most awesome and awful power. We should tilt the balance as far as we can to liberty. Before using that power should be used, as the prayer book says of marriage, reverently, discreetly, advisedly, soberly.
I don't think many people know that only socialists publicly advocated genocide in the 19th, 20th centuries. I think that's a very little known fact, and it seems shocking if you mention it. I've lectured on it here and in other universities, and it's always greeted with a sense of shock. First appeared in January 1849 in Marx's journal Neue Rheinische Zeitung. Engels wrote of how the class war in Marxian terms means that when socialist revolution happens, the class war happens, there will be primitive societies in Europe 2 stages behind, because they're not even capitalist yet. And he had in mind the Basques and the Bretons and the Scottish Highlanders and the Serbs, and he calls them racial trash, Abfälle, racial trash, and they will have to be destroyed, because being 2 stages behind in the historical struggle, it will be impossible to bring them up to the point of being revolutionary.
You can find more at aradio.wordpress.com, where you can find links to us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Gab and email. We are continuing to reach out to you, so please pass on the links. Please click on the follow button on Spreaker.com. You can listen to all my morning moments at Spreaker.com under A Radio, that's EHRADIO, A Radio, and please click on the like button. And you can find all my podcasts and morning moments at aradio.wordpress.com and click on the Morning Moments tab.